Hello and welcome to Cycles of Time, your weekly guide to what's happening on Earth as we make our revolutionary journey around the sun. For time immemorial, our human ancestors have created myths and meanings to help us adapt and thrive as seasons change. Join me each week to explore the intersections of these ancient cycles, from the indigenous medicine wheel to the pagan wheel of the year, the Babylonian and Greek Zodiac to the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes. I'm your host, Allison Dale, and this is the Cycles of Time podcast. Hey friends, happy solar eclipse. How are y'all doing out there? It's been a lot lately, hasn't it? This eclipse that is happening today, if you're listening to this as this comes out on Monday, April 8th, is definitely the most talked about eclipse I've ever encountered in my life, at least, by so much. The amount of articles and videos and theories that have been flying around about this day are wild. I mean, just the sheer quantity that I've seen. And I don't know if that's just because I'm in a bubble of kind of meaning-making practitioners like astrologers and human design folks, but I definitely feel like a lot of the chatter this year has gone from the edges into the center with this eclipse, and it's just being spoken about in lots of different circles and so much information being shared about it. So I'm sure you're probably already maybe inundated with a lot of information about this, but I hope to bring in a little bit of a new perspective today and throughout the course of this week about where this eclipse is landing in the cycle of time. Personally, I've been sick since the last eclipse on March 25th, the Libra lunar eclipse. So again, pardon any coughs and my nasally voice here. I have a dream of sounding like the female version of Roman Mars, who's my favorite podcast host of a podcast called 99% Invisible, and I just love his voice. And so my dream is to have people love my voice and to love my voice as well. But that hasn't quite worked out so far since I've started this. I've been sick in one way or another, but thank you for listening. I'm so over being sick, but I'm leaning into considering this sickness as a great purge of what my body no longer needs so that I can be healthy and fit and fresh after this week for the whole rest of the year. I remember last October when the last eclipse portal was happening, the last series of eclipses, I also had some kind of respiratory and GI situation. And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, the great purge, this is like lunar eclipses are about releasing what we no longer serves us so that we can clear the space to bring in new energy on the solar eclipse. And so that's just kind of a coincidence that that's happened in both of the last two eclipse seasons. And so I'm just going to roll with that and say that, there's something higher that's giving me what I need. I'm curious, what are you guys doing for the eclipse? Everybody listening out there, I know that a lot of people in my community are paying reverence to their lunar sides, this kind of embodied, reflective moon place as the moon overtakes the sun, and staying inside and listening to traditional cultures that say to stay indoors, away from the so-called baleful rays of the eclipse. So I know plenty of people that are like, yeah, I'm not going to fuck with that. I'm not going. I would never try to put myself in line of the eclipse's energy. That just seems like too much. But on the other hand, I know several people who are traveling to the eclipse path, and all the Airbnbs along that are booked up. I saw a map yesterday that was of all where Airbnbs have been booked up, and they're completely booked along the eclipse path. It's a very cool infographic to look at that. But yeah, I know people that are going to some music festivals that are happening in Texas and in Arkansas, and kind of staying in a single location to hopefully catch a glimpse of the eclipse. And I know others who are actually planning to be mobile and chase the eclipse across the country so that they can find a place with the least cloud cover, because there are a lot of storms predicted for for today, and so we'll see how that shakes out. But best wishes and good luck to all of you who are going out to see this eclipse. I'm sure it will be an incredible experience that you'll never forget. And be safe out there. There's just a lot of people traveling across space-time right now, so just take care and make sure to ground yourself as well if you're on the road listening to this right now. I am, really curious to hear what you're all doing and what your thoughts about viewing the eclipse or not are all about. And I'm also just really curious to hear feedback from you all in general and learn how these cycles of time are landing with you each week, how the different gates of the I Ching that we transit through and the different zodiac signs and the different seasons, how that's all landing with you in your life. So, we're just getting started here, and I don't have a huge amount of listeners, but I have started a Facebook group that's just called Cycles of Time, and it's kind of a community discussion group with the purpose of sharing what's going on when it comes to each of these transits and being able to have a place to talk about it. So I would love it if you join that. You can just search Cycles of Time on Facebook groups or reach out to me and I'll add you. I'm on Instagram at Cycles of Time Podcast, Cycles of Time Podcast, and on Facebook as well. And I just joined TikTok too, so look me up there. Anyway, so I look forward to having more conversations in that regard. But anyway, the eclipse, let's see. I remember the first eclipse I ever saw. I was 8 years old, and my gymnastics class at Zia Gymnastics here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, we all went outside in our little leotards to glimpse the amazing phenomenon through pinhole cameras that we had built out of cardboard boxes. We didn't really have eclipse glasses back then, so all we did was had a few of these boxes and took turns looking at the ground as the sky around us got darker and darker, and the air, I remember, getting a little bit cooler. And I definitely remember it clearly because of how strange I could feel in the air. I could feel this tingling sensation that something was different, but it was also strange to be looking at the ground instead of the sky during this time. And it's just really stuck in my memory. So whether you're looking down or up or inward today, this is marking the moment that we've been waiting for, the great American solar eclipse in Aries. And I definitely am planning to sit in meditation during the eclipse myself and look at all the amazing photos that people gather. I have heard that right now we are in what's called a solar maximum period with the sun, where the sun emits, has different frequencies that of solar flares that it emits over time. And I learned that the sun goes in an 11-year cycle of these solar flares. And right now, at this very moment, we are experiencing some super crazy solar flare activity, like massive solar radiation coming towards the Earth. So if you are looking at the eclipse or photographing it or just experiencing the energy of it, the sun is definitely super powerful right now. And that lines up so much with, the sun being in the fire sign of Aries. And also it's in its exalted decan and its exalted degree of Aries, if that means anything to you. If it doesn't, just leave it. But it is a part of the Aries sign that's ruled by the sun, actually. And it's at the degree 19 degrees of Aries that is also ruled by the sun. And so it's a very solar moment in the astrology, as well as in, physical reality. So reverence to the sun right now. How are you feeling out there? I think that any way you shake it, eclipses are big shifts of energy. Even if it's just picking up the energy of the other people that are paying attention to this, the collective, the societal energy. But personally, it's everybody I know that I've talked to in the past week or so has just felt completely overwhelmed with exhaustion or with excitement or with just feeling and emotion. And eclipses are known to bring in endings, kind of usher in quickly endings about what has become stagnant in your life, and open the door for new beginnings and new potentials to heal old wounds. And there's just kind of this time-bending quality to the eclipse moments and the eclipse seasons that, I don't know about you, but I've just felt like kind of detached from the fabric of space-time a little bit. And I've just decided to say, that's okay. That's where we're at. So if you've been feeling that way too, just give yourself some grace and some pat on the back for making it through this. We are here. So to keep up with tradition, it was a bit of a long intro there, but to keep up with tradition, I will do your weekly overview to start this out and then get into the gates that we're transiting through, because that is what is changing this week. So your weekly overview is we are in the medicine wheel direction of the east. We are in the Wuxing element or phase of wood. We're in the pagan season of Ostara, the zodiac sign of Aries, in the end of the second decan of Aries, 19 degrees. We're in the moon phase of the new moon, and every solar eclipse always happens on a new moon because the moon and sun must be together in the sky in a conjunction for a solar eclipse to happen. And so that is happening today, April 8th. We are transiting through the Human Design Gate or Ching Hexagram 51, which is known as the Gate of Shock, or Zhen, a powerful jolt in the I Ching. And on Wednesday, the 10th, we're transiting into gate 42, or actually on the 11th, between 11th and 15th of April, we're transiting into gate 42, which is known as increase in the I Ching, or the gate of growth in human design. So we'll start with those transits between the gate of shock and the gate of growth. And if you look at the wheel of the year, the cycles of time diagram that I've created, I have started sending out on my Substack, the Astrosomatics Substack, a transcript of this podcast, as well as a highlighted version of that diagram to kind of show where we're at visually. And you can see that gates 51 and 42 are reaching into the end of Aries season and toward the season of Taurus, the season of Beltane, working our way toward the season of fire in the Wuxing cycle. And so we're moving along, progressing quickly through spring. I'm looking around outside and seeing so many daffodils and buds on my aspen tree, and my rose bushes yesterday just popped out a bunch of fresh leaves. And so it feels like, okay, we're in this energy. But this week we'll focus a bit on these human design gates of 51 and transiting into 42, as that is kind of what's changing over the course of the week. So I'm calling this episode a shocking solar eclipse because, as we just discussed, the sun and the moon are meeting in the human design gate of shock. We talked about this a bit last week as the sun entered the gate of shock last Thursday, and it'll stay here until this Wednesday when we'll transition into the gate of growth. The eclipse is happening in the zodiac sign Aries. And this week I made a little social media carousel post and a reel about all of the gates that the sun is transiting through during Aries season. A big part of this podcast is seeing how these different philosophies relate to each other and interconnect with each other. So making that post was kind of a cool bird's eye view of the ordering of the gates in this first zodiac month of spring. So you can check that out on your socials by following Cycles of Time podcast or Astrosomatics. And it's kind of just a review of the energies of the season of the Ram through a Ram's point of view. Basically, we started back in the beginning of this podcast on the spring equinox with the Gate of Innocence, Gate 25. And this was the freshly born, wide-eyed infant ram, little baby sheep. And then the second gate that we transited through was the Gate of Opinions, which I liken to a baby ram finding its voice and bleating for all to hear. If you want to find on TikTok, there's like these amazing compilations of baby rams, baby sheep, just like baaing and bleating. And it just feels so appropriate for the beginning of Aries season, like everybody speaking their opinions for everyone to hear. And then last week we were in the Gate of the Hunter and Huntress, which I liken to the young ram growing in their horns, setting their sights toward a goal and kind of play butting, ramming into other little rams. And then the end of last week and into this week, the Gate of Shock is the more mature, older ram kind of discovering in that play butting and as their horns grow in more that the world will fight back. And the shock from the world fighting back and from kind of, seeing how your impact affects the world. Then this week, we're going to move into the Gate of Growth, which is the adult ram making the realization that the world is made up of a cycle of actions and reactions and calls and responses. And it's an infinite cycle. It's not just about you and it's not just about the other. It's about the interplay and the relationship between the two. And that is what growth is all about. And then finally, the last gate of Aries season, which bleeds into the beginning of Taurus season, is the Gate of Ordering, which allows the elder ram to distill all of the lessons from Aries season, break out of their reactive patterns, and initiate something brand new. So we are right in the middle of that right now. And with this eclipse in mind, I spent a good amount of time over this last week thinking about shock and how it relates to growth. This eclipse itself promises some kind of shocking story on the news. I'm recording this a day before, and so I don't know what's going to come out on Monday or during the week that you're listening to this. But, there's plenty of shocking news every day. Absolutely. And so this eclipse will definitely lead to having some kind of shocking external realization about the world around us, or possibly some kind of shocking inner revelation about, how we handle all of the energies that have been building up. So I'm going to focus this episode on that evolution of how something shocking ultimately helps us grow. And I was thinking back to the last time that I truly felt shocked and really shocked, and I couldn't really put my finger on it in the moment. There's definitely been some things that have shocked me, some events that have happened that have come out of left field and have been disturbing or upsetting or exciting, but I couldn't really be like, oh yeah, when did I feel that powerful embodied sense of shock in my body? And I couldn't really think of anything. I think that shock is something that comes out of the blue. It has to. And it's a moment in time, a poignant moment of awakening. And you feel the shock in a sudden moment, but the electrical current that leads up to that moment of shock, like a lightning bolt or a live wire, doesn't necessarily come out of nowhere. Shock pretty much always reveals something that's been hidden for a time. It's not always, lightning is pretty sudden from its source to where it lands, but some things feel shocking because we realize that something has been hidden. And I think that the longer we know that something has been hidden before we become aware of it, kind of the more shocking that shock can be. And it kind of cuts deeper if we realize that, oh, wait, there's been something that I didn't know about. And then I get this news, this information delivered. I get a phone call and it's just like, whoa, how long has this been happening? How long did you know about this? Why is this new to me? And I think that, if I slowed down enough, I would have to admit that a lot of things in this world, almost every day, are shocking to me. I think that so many of us have become jaded and that jadedness is kind of our body's way of insulating us from like a near constant barrage of shock. I think that we have just so much access to so much violence and so muchness that's happening out in the world, and that we don't really feel shock as much. It's not quite the word that we come to when we hear news that could otherwise like break us down, break us to our core. I think, sometimes we hear something that might otherwise feel shocking and kind of, play it off like, oh shit, I can't believe that. Well, actually, I'm not that surprised. In my life and over a lot of our lives in this generation, I think we've developed really thick skins, especially when it comes to hearing about things that aren't immediately affecting our immediate skin and bones, our bodies. I think we've known of war and we've been at war to some degree in some far-off place pretty much constantly for most of our lives. And it's just become, the more we know, the less we're surprised about things as they happen. And again, I'm talking about shock here that feels disturbing because I think it's on a lot of our minds. But there are shocks that are exciting and welcome news as well. So I don't want to discredit that if that's your experience this week. And you're receiving a shock that like some really great news happened. I would love to hear about any of those situations that are going on this week for sure. But it seems like we've finally reached a tipping point where the amount of unconscionable events and actions that we're surrounded by are unable to really stay hidden these days. And we're really unable to stay numb to the extent of what's going on. And I think a lot of this has to do with the way we're consuming media today. And we're seeing the skin and bones for people from all over the world at our fingertips. I think that when I was growing up, the news was always on in my house. My dad was a news junkie, and so the TV news was always on, and I remember just always kind of overhearing, horrific things that are coming out on CNN. Not so much Fox News, luckily, in my house, but all the different news channels kind of flip between them. And I remember hearing like a British accent on BBC News talking about the bombing in Yugoslavia, or hearing a talking head on CNN, arguing. There's always these white men, yelling at each other and arguing at each other about who's more right. And those experiences of receiving news about the world felt so far from my day-to-day life that even if I was old enough to understand it then, I think I would have still felt kind of sheltered and numb, almost like it was a show that, it was a TV show that I was watching, and that was kind of a boring one. And there's definitely footage on TV, but it's presented in a certain way that didn't feel as immediate and as embodied and as personal. And now, of course, we have TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and dozens of other peer journalists showing us inside their living rooms and inside regions where a genocide is actively taking place. And we know that it's being paid for by our tax dollars, where there's a transparency where we're aware that this is not something that is just happening on the other side of the world, but that we're interconnected with it. And I think it's impossible not to feel shocked at this moment in time. And I personally feel very shocked and disgusted, like shocked into a point of disgust. Like that might be why I'm unable to get rid of this sickness. It's been a constant barrage, and there's really only so much that we can take. And I'm definitely a fan of media diets and making sure that I'm not caught up on the doom scroll all the time, or reading articles or paying attention to the news. Like I definitely make time to play with my daughter and get out into nature and make art and do proactive things. But even still, it gets through. And the images that I saw a couple of days ago of the World Central Kitchen humanitarian aid trucks in Gaza being deliberately targeted by 3 Israeli bombs definitely penetrated any defenses that I had, kind of created in the course of just so much over the past several months. And the news that $18 billion worth of bombs was approved by the U.S. government to be sent to Israel on the same day as that attack really did shock me to the core. And I've been shocked it didn't require, American and European people being targeted for me to feel by any means. And there's a lot of critique about that right now, that it took that for Biden to make any statement about a potential ceasefire or potential de-escalation when there's been tens of thousands of people killed that are not American or European citizens. And it doesn't mean that I haven't been shocked leading up to this and that any of us haven't been shocked, but just seeing that growth in humanity in such a clear way, having worked with nonprofits for a majority of my life and in that space of humanitarian aid, it's just really hit home. And so I thought I would mention it here. This is not going to be a political podcast by any means, and I don't want that as a disclaimer, but generally I'm really trying to focus on what these ancient cycles can teach us about persevering through times of hardship. But at certain moments, it's hard not to work that into my narrative and just kind of what I'm thinking about. So, shock. I think that feeling shock is really good for us, actually. I feel awakened. I feel glad that I'm not so numbed to it, so apathetic. I haven't curated such a thick skin that nothing can get through. But I think that shock generally is good for our growth. Because if we insulate ourselves from shock but by burying ourselves in the sand, we'll get stuck there. And stagnancy is not growth. And that's similar to like if we play it cool or we play it smart or whatever and tell ourselves that something doesn't shock us because we already knew it. I already knew that would happen. It doesn't surprise me. I think by doing that, we take steps backwards away from meeting the shock and meeting our feelings from what they really are. And anything that we push down or push away in that way will likely be reintroduced to us later down the line through a different messenger, through pain in our bodies, or through another experience that we have. But I do believe that the theme of this week and the theme of this eclipse of feeling the shock, of standing up to the shock, is really important for our soul growth and for our growth throughout our lifespan. And so I've been really feeling into the lesson of the young ram being shocked and offended by how the world butts back against him sometimes, how he falls off a mountain when he's trying to climb it, or another ram has bigger horns all of a sudden and just like butts him down. And in this metaphor and in this telling, with spring arriving so full of innocence and hope, we soon inevitably discover how much the world can hurt. And I think it's like that innocence and that hope meeting up with shock that helps us grow. I think something becomes shocking, or it is shocking, because it goes against our assumptions about how something should be. And in Aries season, I think that, in the beginning of the astrological year, I think that these hopes and assumptions are not just coming from our past experiences within this life, but the hopes and assumptions that we have at this time of year are coming from somewhere really deep and somewhere connected to the cycles of the past, the cycles of time that have occurred in the past, and connected to the purest truth. Although it feels like years ago already, it was only a few short weeks ago that we were in Pisces season, the Pisces being the archetype of the two fishes swimming in the sea of eternity, and Pisces representing the time that happens after death and before birth. Pisces being the merging together in dream space of all the lessons that we've accumulated over our last lifetimes and all of our lifetimes and throughout the collective consciousness of humanity. Pisces is a blending, a merging, a boundaryless space. And kind of in ecology, I see Pisces as represented by the soil that is made up of all the compost of the past lives and the rock that's been eroded by the weather, by the snow and the ice and the rain, and just a new creation of a deep, rich soil from times that have gone by. And that is the soil that Aries, the seed of spring, grows out of. And so the hopes and assumptions that the little ram or the little sprout comes in with in Aries season are mostly just a desire to reconnect to that infinite collective consciousness and that love. I believe it's love, that desire for us all to just get along, to recognize that we're not separate from one another. And I think that those hopes and those assumptions are coming from a place that is rich with the wisdom of timelessness. And the hope and assumptions that the shocking event is trying to take down are not based on idealism or selfishness or just something that just happened to us and isn't connected to something larger. But I think that a shocking event, brings us face to face with our desire for wholeness and our desire for unity and our knowledge that is really the truth, that we do not have distinctions and separations between us. So, when something calls that to your attention, recoiling against the shock is not a bad thing. And I think it's very natural to move away from what shocks us. And, all animals do it, even little sea sponges or little single-celled organisms in the primordial soup. They come up against something, bump up against something else, and immediately go away from it. That's like the natural thing to do. But I think the growth really comes and the evolution comes when we realize that we can only overcome shock by recoiling first, but making that a limited time, like not recoiling forever, and instead letting the shock awaken us and strengthen us and respond to it as an active player. In the I Ching, the gate of shock is called thunder. It's represented by two of the thunder trigrams, thunder over thunder. And when we unexpectedly hear thunder, we first might feel that embodied sense of fear or shock or that kind of recoiling intention. And then soon after that, usually, we have a sharpened vision and like a quickened awakening of knowledge to temporarily seek shelter or to awake to the storm that is brewing. This eclipse happening in the gate of shock, it means that both of the sun and the moon are in the gate of shock. And I also wanted to talk a little bit here about a couple more planetary players who are also currently in this gate, in gate 51, at 19 degrees Aries. The comet or asteroid Chiron, which is a planetary body known as the Wounded Healer, is also here too at this exact degree of the eclipse. And Mercury is also retrograding back through Aries, not in the gate of shock, but close by this week. So the energy of both Chiron and Mercury retrograde in this area of the sky are adding an element of kind of deep reflection and review and reconsideration of our personal wounds so that we can heal them. When Mercury, I'm sure you've heard about Mercury retrograde, Mercury Gatorade, and I won't always talk about all the planets, but when they are in the area of the sky that we're discussing that week, I'll definitely bring them in. But when Mercury is retrograde, it simply means that based on the different orbital speeds between the Earth and another planet, so in this case, the Earth and Mercury orbiting around the sun at different speeds, Mercury is appearing to go backwards across the ecliptic from our point of view on Earth. So remember, the ecliptic is the apparent path of the sun as it travels around the Earth from our perspective here on Earth. And so that just really looks like it's going back as if you watch Mercury day by day, going through this, the ecliptic, passing in a certain direction. At a certain point, about 3 times a year, it starts to look like it's moving backwards in the opposite direction. And other planets go retrograde as well, all the time. Venus, Mars, Uranus, Pluto, all of them. But Mercury is in retrograde motion 3 times a year just about. And so it's the most commonly kind of joked about thing in pop astrology, I would say. We all, during Mercury retrograde are afraid of traveling and afraid of sending the wrong email and our technology going bust. And this can definitely be true. If we're trying to move too fast during a Mercury retrograde, the universe is going to let us know. Retrogrades I see as a great times actually for intentionally slowing down rather than coming up against the shock of, oh, my computer just died on me, or, like I sent the wrong email or whatever. I think that if we take these times of the year as intentional periods of slowing down and implement rewords into our lives, like redoing, renewing, revising, recalibrating, then it can actually really be really positive times. And we're in the middle of the retrograde right now in Aries from April 1st until April 25th. And so the eclipse today and this week, we're falling right in the middle of that. And so we're definitely in a period of recalibration and intentional slowness if we are so blessed to be able to take that. And I think, we all need times within the year to edit the book we're writing and to look over the direction we're going. And so, with these 3 periods a year when Mercury is in retrograde, or Mercury is retrograde, not in retrograde, it gives us time to do that. This Mercury retrograde is conjunct the eclipse, so it'll be a little more kind of like tension of energy, this desire to slow down and reflect with a quick moving solar energy. So if you're feeling any anger or frustration or just kind of like pent up in your body, there's definitely a conflicting kind of energetic nature between the planetary conditions right now. So this eclipse and Mercury are also conjunct right now. Chiron, as I mentioned, the wounded healer asteroid. I actually just learned that Chiron used to be considered an asteroid, but in the astronomy community, the planetary body is now considered a comet or a planetoid rather than an asteroid. And I can't speak to exactly why that differentiation was made, but so we can kind of call Chiron whatever we want. It's a pretty big rock floating out there, orbiting in an elliptical orbit between Saturn and Uranus. And that might mess up my very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas. That was already messed up when Pluto was demoted from being a planet, but putting Chiron in there would add something else. I'll have to come up with the acronym. There's obviously a lot of asteroids that we can think about, but Chiron is kind of a big player. He's kind of considered the bridge between the energies of Saturn and Uranus, because in the physical world, he is hanging out between the two of them. And Saturn represents tradition and structure and hierarchy, and is the lord of time. And Uranus is the planet of the future and lightning and revolution. Chiron ties those two things together, which is a great place to be right now for this eclipse. We are definitely on a bridge between the past and the future, and we can all feel it. In mythology, Chiron was a centaur who was rejected and abandoned by his mother. Some renditions of the myth say that she rejected him just because of his beastly appearance, being half man and half horse. But other myths tell that it was because his mother, Philyra, who's a sea nymph, was raped by the Titan god Cronus, who was in the form of a horse. Chiron was found and adopted by the god Apollo, and raised by him. And he ended up becoming a famous teacher and healer, known for his profound abilities in math, science, and the arts. He healed and taught many students, but at the end of the story is that he couldn't heal his own deepest wound. And Chiron met his demise when he was wounded by an arrow dipped in hydro blood. The arrow was shot by Heracles in a battle between the god and a group of centaurs. In Greek mythology, centaurs were known to be bestial and lusty and uncivilized creatures. Chiron was not, because he was raised by Apollo. But in general, there were lots of centaurs in Greek mythology, and they were seen as just lower type of creatures. And they approached a cave in this story where Hercules had convinced another god to open up a bottle of wine, a sacred bottle of wine, so that he could drink it. And in some tellings, this was a sacred bottle of wine that the centaurs had vowed to protect at another moment in time. And they smelled it being open so that, to drink, and went towards it. This was either because they were protecting it or because they wanted to drink it, depending on the telling of the myth. But they smelled it and went to the cave, and a battle ensued between the god and the centaurs, where Chiron was caught in the crossfire. Chiron wasn't necessarily with the centaurs. He was more in the side of gods, but saw this battle happening, got in the way, and got injured by this hydra blood-soaked arrow. And then Chiron, tried to heal the wound because he could heal everyone else, but he could not heal his own wound. And this is the big story of the wounded healer. I've thought about this myth a lot recently and read different tellings of it. And I like to think of Chiron as being so wounded, and the place where we have Chiron in our charts being this really deep wounded place, because it's a place where we can't reconcile polarities that exist within us. And I think that, Chiron witnessed this battle between the gods, the civilized and powerful types of entities that raised him, and a group of people that he looked like, a group of, beings that he looked like and that he was. And he was wounded by that dichotomy. He couldn't reconcile the polarities between animal versus God, the past versus the future, between nature versus nurture, or body versus mind. And he was in so much pain, and because he was immortal, he was unable to die. So he ended up giving up his immortality, and then Zeus placed him among the stars for eternity. This story there's so much to it, and so many layers and so many different tellings. But Chiron in our personal lives and in the birth chart, and in the chart of this eclipse, is being highlighted to ask each of us to look at what seems irreconcilable within our own self, which wounds have become blind spots to who we want to become. In order to grow, we must look at the things that we've been hiding from ourselves, the things that have been too painful to look at. So during this eclipse, if an old emotion or a pattern comes up for you, something that's been coming up again and again throughout your life, it might actually feel shocking to you that it's still there, and it's still something to be contended with. And that definitely happens for me sometimes. Like, I've heard that healing is a spiral or not a straight line, but sometimes that's just so frustrating because it's like, wait, I thought I dealt with this. I thought I healed that wound. I thought I was over that, right? But then it comes back up again in another way, in a relationship or in something that happens. And I think that can just feel so frustrating. There's a certain shame in that. Like, I thought I was done with this. And so oftentimes when that happens, there's a tendency to retreat and recoil and kind of be like, well, I already knew that about myself. But like I mentioned earlier, thinking about shock and growth in the same sentence, I think in order to grow, we can take something that shocks us or something that resurfaces and consider how much we've already grown since the last time that pattern arose. What new information are we bringing to the table? Chiron tends to deal with childhood and ancestral wounds, and the wounds like this that are the most invisible to us. They're kind of like blind spots in our lives, things that have felt kind of so intertwined with our very being that we have created mechanisms so we don't have to look at them. And that's often very subconscious and very unconscious. And this eclipse conjunct Chiron is asking us to look at them. We definitely don't want to go in without any armor. We don't want to re-traumatize ourselves by, just saying, okay, cool, bring it. Like, what is my wounding? What are the things that are painful to me? But if something does come up in a way that you don't expect this week, some questions you can ask yourself are, what parts of my past do I still believe are irreconcilable with my desired future? What truths do I feel in my body that I still believe in my mind are irreconcilable with my mind and with my ego? And what parts of me still believe in the hierarchy between animals and gods, between my body's desires and my nature and the things that I feel that I want and my ideals of society or of what the world is telling me I should be like. And oftentimes chironic wounds are brought up to really highlight these binaries, and they can feel like the unsolvable riddles sometimes. But this week, I really invite you to drop the binary ways of thinking about these and show your shadow side some love. Just really give yourself a lot of space and a lot of care for anything that comes up, and recognize that these are not opposites, and that our wounds really show us where we are growing. They're beautiful opportunities to see clearly what it is that we desire, what it is that we want in this life. And we should give ourselves as much as we can some acceptance of ourselves in fullness for all that we are this week, rather than saying, okay, this eclipse is here and something's ending and something's new beginning and I'm just on this treadmill. I think the Mercury retrograde and the Chiron here are really giving us an opportunity to sit with the truth, the deeper truths behind the directions that we're going so quickly. The great poet Rumi famously said, "The wound is the place where the light enters." And this feels especially true this week. I think allowing your wounded areas to show you where it is that you're growing, allowing the light to enter through these places that you feel shocked, and giving yourself the time and space to do so is just the best gift that you could give yourself during this week of shock and growth. This eclipse is activating my 9th house. I have Aries in my 9th house. The 9th house is the house of travel and higher education and philosophy and wisdom traditions. And that's really shown up in a big way for me. I've been kind of obsessively reading and writing and creating content and teaching and giving readings and just kind of intaking and outputting a lot of information. But as part of that, I've been reading a couple books about the Wuxing cycle, which is the 5-element cycle of Taoist origin that I'm going to be speaking quite a bit about in this podcast. And the books that I've been reading have really reiterated something that I'd like to talk about here a little bit. It's really just the idea that we grow through change. And the elements, I refer, to the stages of the year in this podcast. The cycle of the year is an ongoing cycle, but I refer to the different chunks as chunks or slices or parts or elements or pieces. But I think that I just wanted to say that I think this can be very misleading, actually. In China, the Wuxing cycle is referred to as the 5-phase cycle, not just the 5-element cycle, but the 5-phase cycle. And this wording highlights the fact that the elements are constantly evolving and changing and bleeding into one another and affecting one another. And just thinking about it that way makes us remember that it is a relational cycle rather than a cycle of 5 distinct and closed objects. In Wuxing, the Chinese character Xing is actually a verb that means to act or to go. So, like, the wood element of this season of spring is not referring to, like, dead wood, but a tree or, a woody plant filled with upward flowing life, which is given to it by the depths of the water season before it. And then we'll move into fire season, where the action of the burning wood is what makes fire possible. And so it's a flow, it's a constant relational movement between things and not distinct pieces or parts. So as we enter gate 42 this week, the gate of growth, I think that's definitely something to contemplate. The lesson of the gate of growth is the realization that life is nothing but a cycle of actions and reactions, calls and responses, phases. 42, this gate asks us to remember that we're always in motion and we're always in flow. It's kind of like the image of a ball with a person standing on top of it. And in order for the person to stay upright, they have to keep moving as the ball keeps turning. We, this week, can take the wisdom of the gate of the hunter and huntress and the gate of shock in combination with each other to know that we are indeed actors on the stage, but also that the world is our stage and that the world is filled with events and people to respond to and to be in relationship with. It almost seems cliche at this point because I've referenced it so much in my life, but I wanted to leave you on that note with a quote from the amazing sci-fi writer Octavia Butler from her book, The Parable of the Sower. It's about, if you haven't read it, it's a dystopian future sci-fi novel where America has, supposedly been made great again. It's a book that was written in the 80s, and Make America Great Again was in there as one of the phrases, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, the main character in the book, who's a very empathic teenage girl named Lauren Olamina, she has this superpower of empathy, of being able to feel what other people feel. She has created a religion, and the religion is called Earthseed. And this is from Earthseed. The first tenet of Earthseed is God is change. The God of Earthseed is not a person. The God of Earthseed does not love us or hate us or watch over us or know us at all. The God of Earthseed just is. God is power, infinite, irresistible, inexorable, indifferent. The one irresistible force of the universe is change. Everything in the universe changes. Every living thing, every bit of matter, all the energy in the universe changes in some way. All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. Whether you're a human being, an insect, a microbe, or a stone, this verse is true. Everyone knows on an intellectual level that change is inevitable, but many people don't feel it on an emotional level. And so they create gods, supernatural authority figures, to stand between them and change. Big Daddy God, Big Cop God, Big King God. For many people, God is just another name for whatever makes them feel special and protected. Earthseed deals with ongoing reality, not with supernatural authority figures. As wind, as water, as fire, as life, God is both creative and destructive, demanding and yielding, sculptor and clay. God is infinite potential. God is change. The God of Earthseed is wildly dynamic. It is faceless, implaceable, and sometimes terrifying, but it is also malleable. God is change. Beware. God exists to shape and be shaped. This is not a very comforting religion. Change can be frightening. Earthseed empowers us to shape God when we can and surrender to God when we cannot. So however you're spending your eclipse, I hope that it delivers the shock and the growth in your life that leads to lasting peace, love, and kindness. I'll see you next week as we delve into more spring themes with the Gate of Ordering, which will help us organize all of these learnings and initiate a brand new chapter. Until then, all my love. Thanks for listening. Bye.